Good morning. In a world of almost continual violence, mayhem, and unrest, it's easy to flail out with our fists, and I realize many do that, to express our unhappiness with the state of affairs. But maybe what we need to appreciate is our language. Appreciate that a little more as a means of venting ourselves. In the novel Billy Budd by Herman Melville many years ago, a young innocent sailor is accused of instigating a mutiny. When he's confronted with this charge, he's unable to express his feelings. He has a speech impediment that manifests itself at that time, and so he resorts to his fists to show his innocence. Yes, ultimately that action leads to the loss of his life. Now, this is an exaggerated circumstance, of course, but perhaps our inability to come up with words which express our sentiments, that may be what prompts a great deal of violence. And one other point. Aren't those who are profane really lazy in their language? They rely on 3 or 4 key words or phrases to summarize anything they have to say. It's kind of an endless staccato. Well, beyond the blasphemy of such expression is a laziness. That's what it is. Ineptitude, maybe. Maybe what the world needs, among many other things, are some innovative expressions. Yeah, even ones of condemnation. How about making our disagreements creative rather than so violent? So many persons these days shout and rave when perhaps a few creative put-downs would give them a better sense of achievement. Creative put-downs? Well, here are a few. Yeah, I'll just show you how this goes. Benjamin Disraeli, replying to a young author who had sent him a manuscript for evaluation, he said, "Many thanks. I shall lose no time in reading it." And then we had Ken Tynan's definition of a critic. A critic is a man who knows the way but cannot drive the car. How about that, see? Oh, this is a real put-down coming up here, summarizing a play. Alexander Walcott's the one who said it. I think it's creative, but it is nasty, too. He said, well, the scenery was beautiful, but the actors got in front of it. And then George Savelle on teaching. I have to think about teaching. He said, the vanity of teaching often tempteth a man to forget that he is a blockhead. Oh, boy. Now, speaking of teaching in the field of education, one more illustration. And look, I don't mean to say that these things are that we're supposed to be nasty in our comments all the time. What I do suggest, though, is that there can be a little element of creativity in them, perhaps. In any event, Erwin Edmund came up with this definition of education, which is, it's not very nice at all, but possibly a little chuckle might come. Education is the process of casting false pearls before real swine. How about that? That's not very good. But it is kind of it's a way of thinking about. I would rather have that kind of language than to have people using their fists and their guns and whatever else they may have in order to say what they think about somebody else. And sometime, if you'd like to know more of these, I'm suggesting a book that was published back a number of years ago. It's by Frank Muir, M-U-I-R. It's titled An Irreverent and Thoroughly Incomplete Social History of Almost Anything. That's the title of the book. Maybe we've got it in the library. You ought to check it out and find out. Because it gives you all sorts of put-downs, among other things, which I still think are, despite their nastiness, a little bit better. Well, much, much better than the violence that we see going on when sometimes people disagree. Be much better. Well, enough of that for today. That's our while. Be back with you next week, same time. Good morning. I'm thinking this morning of Mark Twain. He was a cantankerous fellow in many ways. He loved to poke holes in the organized churches and incorporated all sorts of corruptions in his fiction, exaggerated many accounts of history, but at heart, he was a man of goodwill, sensitivity. And in his book, Life on the Mississippi, Mark Twain shares a personal experience that offers much food for thought, I think, for every one of us. As a young man, you see, Twain longed to be a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi, and he wrote frequently of the beauty of that awesome river. He recalls, and I'm quoting now, "A certain wonderful sunset which I witnessed when steamboating was new to me. A broad expanse of the river turned to the color of blood. In the middle distance the red hue brightened into gold, through which a solitary log came floating, black and conspicuous, and in one place a long slanting mark lay sparkling on the water. In another the surface was broken by boiling, tumbling rings that were as many tinted as an opal." And he continues this remembrance of the river beauty by writing, "Where the ruddy flush was faintest was a smooth spot that was covered with graceful circles and radiating lines ever so delicately traced. The shore on our left was densely wooded, and the somber shadow that fell from this forest was broken in one place by a long, ruffled trail that shone like silver, and high above the forest wall a clean-stemmed dead tree waved a single leafy bough that glowed like a flame in the unobstructed splendor of the sun." And then Mark Twain concluded, "There were graceful curves, reflected images, woody heights, soft distances, and over the whole scene the dissolving lights drifted steadily, enriching it every passing moment with new marvels of coloring." Well, then something happened to Twain. He learned about the lessons of riverboat piloting. It took many months, many trips under strict teaching, but he mastered the art of handling those giant riverboats back in the mid-19th century. He said, "I mastered the language of the water and had come to know every feature as familiarly as I knew the letters of the alphabet. I had made a valuable acquisition. And then," he says, "but I lost something too. Something which he said could never be restored to him as long as he lived." What had he lost? He knew how to pilot the riverboats. He had mastered the river, but he had lost the beauty. Every beautiful aspect of the river now became merely useful. The golden sunset, well, it just meant now how much wind or rain the pilot could expect tomorrow. That slanting mark on the water, now it was referring merely to a bluff reef which is going to kill somebody's steamboat one of these nights. And then those tumbling boils, well, it just meant only a dissolving bar and a changing channel there. And the lines in the water merely showed a troublesome place was shoaling up. And the tall tree with the long branch and leaf became just a landmark. It told me how many miles he'd gone. He wrote, "The romance and the beauty were all gone from the river." And then he asked himself whether one gains more or loses more by, quote, "learning his trade." Well, so be. There's a beauty surrounding all of us, isn't there, in vestiges of nature, human graces, interplay of thoughts. I hope no teacher ever enters a classroom merely because it's useful that the teacher be there. And I hope that no student ever misses the beauty of learning merely because it's useful so that the student can get a job later on. Is that too idealistic? Well, as I said, Mark Twain was a real hard-nosed fellow in so many ways, but for him to reflect upon the experience and share his lesson, a sensitive one, is to give me reason to consider. If the entire experience is only to be useful for a job, then let's turn it all over to the computers. They have no emotions and no need for beauty. But you and I have emotion, and we all benefit from beauty. That's our while for this morning. Good morning. It's not the most common term to use in street corner conversations, true, but it's an important one. Lexicology. It's the study of word origins and meanings. I keep wondering, however, if some persons have purchased a certain book recently for the wrong reasons. Seeing the title, they may have glossed over a key word and assumed it was another. That practice has undoubtedly helped sales of the book, though its title is The Joy of Lex. It's a book about words, not about deeds. It's interesting to think about it. And one of my favorite segments is a list of the author, by the author of masterpieces of world literature. Giles Brandreth is the author. Titles all with plays or puns on words. I'd like to share a few of them with you this morning. The Prison Memoirs of a Chimney Sweep, Grime and Punishment. How about the autobiography of Walt Disney? What would that be? Of Mice and Me. How about the life of Florence Nightingale? Of Human Bondage. Yes. Well, how about the ultimate handbook for social climbers? The Lord of the Rungs. And one of my favorites, how about the tale of a group of insane gourmets? The Lunch Pack of Notre Dame. See how we do this, though? We get rid of these words, we just come up with some pretty close ones. Works out pretty well. It can happen to us in a variety of ways. And what about words that are formed by combining two other words? You know, we have motel, that's motor plus hotel. And bunch, I think that's breakfast plus lunch comes, or brunch, I should say. Brunch is breakfast plus lunch. And, of course, cheeseburger would be very obvious, wouldn't it, as you put the two words together. Well, Lewis Carroll used some interesting words. How about galumph, G-A-L-U-M-P-H? Of course, that's gallop plus triumph. Works out pretty well. Typewriter. Oh. That was before the computer age, but still something we can. And then, of course, with words, there's always a little bit of fun with sounds of words. I wonder, with tongue twisters, could you say, for example, which wrist watches are Swiss wrist watches? Try that. Which wrist watches are Swiss wrist watches? Sister Susie says she shall shortly sew a sheet. I didn't do that right. Sister Susie says she shall shortly sew a sheet. Enough of that. Wordplay is fun. In all sorts of ways that we can get into wordplay. And I guess I just want to conclude here with a book that has wordplay in a different sense. Have you ever read Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce? Published way back in 1939, and it is one of the toughest books you could ever try to unravel. It's because it has made-up words. And they're not fun words exactly like the ones we've used. No, the words are long words. On page 1, for example, of that novel, there's a word that has exactly 100 letters in it. I counted them. And I do not know what the word means. I do not know how to pronounce it. Well, when you try to do those things with a 100-letter word, I think you may well have gone beyond the joy of Lex. So much for lexicology. Back with you next week. Well, good morning. This is the old English prof from way back when, and this is the first day of classes at Motus Unionius Collegium. Anyway, I've been thinking about you very much and all of the new freshman students at Mount Union. Bless your hearts, it's wonderful to have you. Problem is, of course, now you got to do homework, and you got to do, well, in freshman English class, imagine, you'll have to write themes. And, strangers are themes, as somebody once said. And you're going to have to write themes, and you're going to have no split infinitives. You're going to have good subject, predicate arrangements. You're going to have a theme that has a point, that makes it early, that then reinforces it. You're going to have no misspelled words. Don't want to do that. No, you're going to have so many rules and so many regulations for freshman English themes. Yep. I did that for many years here teaching, and I know that it's continuing because, after all, that's what it's all about. We've got to be able to communicate. There are over 600,000 words in the English language, and we ought to be able to do a fairly decent job in expressing it to others. We have those freshman themes, and you'll have to be describing things. You'll have to be sharing some personal points of view. Maybe you're going to have some dialogue, all sorts of challenges. And of course, then if you don't get an A+ on that first theme, Could be pretty rough, I realize. Well, there is a point, however, to continuing to try for an A, continuing to try to do something that somebody thinks is pretty good writing, even if you fail for a while. I'm thinking of Dr. Seuss. Yes, of all things, Dr. Seuss. He belongs in freshman English classes, too. I presume that most of you are familiar with the books of Dr. Seuss. But this is the point that I want to make. If you need a little more encouragement in your writing, if you need a little more sense of, gee, maybe I'm doing something right, stay with it. Don't quit. No. Don't give up. No, never. Why? Dr. Seuss's first children's book, the very first one he wrote, was not only turned down by the first publisher he submitted it to, turned down by the second one, by the third one, by the fourth one, by the fifth one, by the sixth. Dr. Seuss's first published children's book was turned down by 23 publishers before it was accepted by the 24th. And can you imagine? The publisher of the 24th publisher sold more than 6 million copies of that first book written by Dr. Seuss. Now look, if he can do that well after 23 rejections, well, then just because you don't get an A+ on the first theme, just because you have a little trouble struggling with, just remember old Dr. Seuss. It was good writing. He just needed the right person to recognize it. I hope that's not the reason that you get an F-. But if it is, keep trying. You can make it. You've got 4 years in which to do it. No, I just think that that's, of course, what education's all about. It's just to keep the learning process, and you can make it, even in those freshman English themes, and others you'll have to write in other classes too. Dr. Seuss did it. And you're every bit as good as Dr. Seuss. I'm sure of that. That's it for now. We'll see you again next week. Good morning. I would have to say, as the old English prof, that I'm not one that watches a great deal of television. And I do like music very much. And I suppose I tend to get most of it in my car radio as I'm driving around. You know, you can be driving at 55 miles an hour and listening to the gleeful whiz of trucks and cars and motorcycles. They're all zapping on past me, of course. But I still find time to enjoy a bit of the scenery. And I also enjoy listening to the car radio. Kind of a little bonus, I guess, for going out on the highways. But in any event, I must tell you, some of the things I hear on the car radio, I'm not so sure about that. One of our Stark County radio stations giving a weather report. Can you imagine this? The announcer said there will be sunny skies tonight. Oh, come on. Tonight there'll be sunny skies. What about the used car dealer here, just very, very close by the campus? Used car dealer said, we offer a 100% limited warranty. Well, now, wait a minute. If it's a 100% limited warranty. I heard that. I understand that. What in the dickens does it mean? I don't know, but the commercial reminds me of a news report that I also heard in the car radio. Get this. 65% of the membership voted unanimously to reject the contract. 65% voted unanimously. Well, you keep on learning about these things. Out on Interstate 71 some time ago, I heard a very emotional preacher telling the world how Bible prophecy was coming true. Now, he didn't quite get the right word. Bless his heart, he meant the right word. I realize that. But he said, among other things, that the gospel is reaching more and more people. Well, that's very good. And then came the unfortunate phrasing. Just think, with the invention of the printing press, we have been able to decimate the news to everyone. Decimate? Decimate? He meant disseminate. There's a difference. Decimate, of course, got to kill them all off. disseminate as to handing them out, of course, and more people getting active participation and involvement and so on. Oh, I tell you, those 600,000 words, there are times when we get close to the right word, but we haven't done the job. Another unfortunate word, well, an announcer calmly said regarding the settlement of a strike, I heard this on the car radio, radioactive raises were granted effective March the 1st. Radioactive raises? I think he meant retroactive. Probably knew I was listening on the car radio, though. And then there are profundities that we encounter. Oh, my goodness, terribly, terribly important statements. Now you can get loans at current interest rates. Get that. Oh, my goodness, I was in the car not long ago. One of the signs caught my eye. It was a place where nice vegetables were grown in abundance. But the sign, however, in front of this was just in front of a home where they had this, I guess, a summertime's place, a sale of their vegetables and so on. But the sign, I'm still working on it. Produce, new and used merchandise. You want to buy some used vegetables? I guess that's the way. Well, I guess the most hilarious thing, hilarious? That may not be the right word. The car radio, I was on, up there on 224, I think. I was somewhere near Youngstown anyway, and on a Thursday night, a local high school football coach was being interviewed by a local sports caster on a local radio station up there. I'll tell you this one. Oh, well, can't argue with it, I guess, but I about went through the guardrail on this. The sportscaster said, Coach, tell me, Coach, how important is this game tomorrow night on your schedule? The coach said, well, I'd say this is one of those ball games that you're going to have to win if you're going to go through the season undefeated. Oh, that's profound, huh? Well, that's enough of it. Enough of it for this morning. Be back with you next week. Hello. If you knew that you could, this very day, influence the lives of, 35 young people, would that startle you or would it frighten you? Or would it challenge you? Well, for one teacher in a high school in South Chicago many years ago, the challenge was a means of bringing startling achievement in the life of one particular student. The student, Geraldine Lawhorn. She was a young woman who became deaf and blind as a high school student. She'd learned to play the piano a few years before, however, and she loved poetry, memorized many poems, but how could she ever face up to the fact that now she would never see and never hear her classmates again? Probably she would achieve little. She'd be becoming a do-nothing person the rest of her life, but one teacher changed that. What to do with a deaf-blind girl? The school said that the teacher should try to be helpful. And Geraldine Lawhorn did go to classes, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, but with a touch system of communication, a few people could communicate some of the things that were going on. But one teacher took up the challenge even more. Geraldine told me, I was so scared of doing anything, and then there was this teacher saying, if I want you to come to my class and talk to them, tell them about what you know, recite some poetry, maybe play a song on the piano for us. Geraldine got that information by what's called the International Manual System, touching the hands, spelling out the words. She says, I was scared, but I was excited. Well, the day of the class visitation came, and she was led to the door of the classroom. It was time for the class to begin, and she told me, I was so scared. She really wanted to talk to the class, but it seemed so awesome because she'd never hear their response. She'd never see how they were reacting. But the teacher opened the door, encouraged her to come in. And Geraldine was so emotionally caught up in the opportunity, she told me she ran through her prepared talk in about 1/4 of the time she had planned. But the teacher knew she needed help, and the teacher encouraged her in class that day, asked questions, got Geraldine to stay in front of the class and recite poetry. And Geraldine began to enjoy it. In fact, it was in the end such a thrill for her that she determined that very day, She was going to work towards a significant dramatic achievement in her life. She told me, I told myself then, I am going to perform someday at Carnegie Hall. Years went by. She did some programs for many groups in Chicago area, and she showed her achievement overcoming the loss of those two key sensory perceptions of sight and hearing. And she achieved her goal. In fact, Geraldine Lawhorn not only gave one, but two performances of music and poetry at Carnegie Hall. She knew that she had achieved a goal in her life. And I'm so grateful to think of that one teacher, high school teacher, who went out of her way to make the special arrangements, recognizing the possibility, recognizing the sense of achievement that could be made by having Geraldine perform in class, though she could never see nor hear her audience. That's the role of the teacher. Be grateful for everyone that reaches out, in whatever the circumstance may be, to help the students. That's what it's all about. Not only teaching some special learning, but you are becoming an example for the students to follow as well. That's it for this time. Hello. I've been thinking about the changing of the guard. Maybe that's what we should call it. But as we move into this month and we look around us outdoors, the colors of autumn are beginning to signal to us. The colors of autumn. I wonder if we take as much interest in watching those colors as we should. There are different ways of expressing them, of course, the colors. Oh, you remember that fellow Henry David Thoreau, that fellow who spent time by himself at Walden Pond in New England back in the 1840s? I know you weren't there at the time, but you probably read something about him in high school, didn't you? Somewhere along the way. Thoreau kept lengthy journals about autumn. He wrote about the changing of the colors. He said, "Many a tale their color told." And gradually, from week to week, the character of each tree came out, and it admired itself reflected in the smooth mirror of the lake. Think of that. Thoreau, I love this phrasing. He put it all in terms of an art gallery. Now we're thinking about the autumnal colors, the trees, the changing of the colors of the leaves. Thoreau put it this way: each morning the manager of this art gallery substituted a new picture, distinguished by more brilliant or harmonious coloring. Isn't that something? Just like going to an art gallery. We don't even have to pay an admission charge. The gallery has provided us much to ponder. Much to ponder, much to think about. Have you ever asked yourself why the trees drop their leaves at this time of year? There's a poem that says why. When April comes, the maple knows it will need a larger suit of clothes. Clothing, yeah, that's what's dropped as the trunk increases, branches widen, and thus the necessity of new measurements, new leaves to cover. Oh, I know, that's just wordplay, but it's fun. But autumn is a good time for wordplay. That's what prompted one of the area bakeries, I presume, some time ago to come up with a billboard. The sign has a mixture of autumn leaves in red and gold mixed in with loaves of bread carrying the bakery's name. And in large print, the billboard said, "Autumn loaves," not autumn leaves. No need to say anything else. I think when I first saw that, this was a couple of years back, I hurried to buy 3 loaves. But beyond such wordplay, autumn has brought, I think, very, very interesting aspects for all of us. We need to think of the way in which we can express the russets and the golds, the greens and the yellows and the reds on the trees. We need to appreciate them. It's just wonderful. And a friend of mine once said, It's been a beautiful autumn. Wouldn't it be grand if we all lived as though we really deserved it? If we really deserved to have the beauty of nature's art gallery. Well, in Thoreau's frame of reference, I'd say that the manager would be pleased if we all understood all the beauty that's offered to us. And then we would be living the lives that deserve the gallery, wouldn't it? And it would be grand. Enjoy the autumn. Enjoy the art gallery of this autumn. Nature's contribution for us. Got to get ready for a new suit of clothes, and we can enjoy the transition. That's it for now.
Not sure I do anymore. Testing, testing. Okay, that's working.
Usually.
Okay, I want to just get a level on here. So.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. Yes. Our while this morning is regarding Bill. He was a young fellow, about 20 years of age. He was lively and he was a good thinker. He was born in Massachusetts and he enjoyed the outdoors. He was talented, came from a variety of his interests. Most people display genuine intelligence, I think. They're curious people. They ask questions. They ponder answers. Well, young Bill had a good family background and opportunities were there for him in terms of a career. But which career? He was pondering that. He thought briefly of a newspaper career, but, law seemed better. He read widely, of course. Maybe reading would help him become a literary writer. Bill enjoyed reading poetry, and he'd written some. But, of course, you don't make much money writing poetry. He knew his religious teachings as well. After all, he had a grandfather named Ebenezer Snell. And you had to be obedient to the teachings. Unsure at times, Bill nevertheless knew that religions, they were important, and religious thought was important. As a teenager, he'd written a poem which he knew would infuriate Ebenezer, so he hid the poem. It was a poem about death, and one which he said it would not be something to fear. But somehow, it wouldn't agree with his grandfather's stern admonitions. And there was another problem in the poem. He never used the term God. I think God was in the poem a number of times, but synonyms were used, terms like nature. So anyway, Bill hid the poem. One day he was trying to put religion and purpose together, trying to put a sense of right activity with a career. He was out walking, and as he pondered, he became aware of a waterfowl flying. It was late autumn, and at that moment Bill's religious thought, his poetry, and his career concerns, and his liveliness as a thinker, they all came together. And I know a few statements of faith more stimulating than what he wrote in a poem entitled To a Waterfowl. He wrote it as of that morning. And part of it reads, He who from zone to zone guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the way that I must tread alone, will lead my steps aright. The bird maybe was migrating, some innate force, some power, maybe a spiritual sense was guiding it to where it would be right. Now, God, that word doesn't appear in the line specifically, and yet the young man writing knew that the same power would guide him as well in his decisions. And he gave testament to that faith. Oh, when did he write this? Not recently, 1815. And the young man was not really referred to as Bill. He was known as William Cullen Bryant. Now, his other poem, the one where he tried to keep from his grandfather, it was titled Thanatopsis. Maybe you've read it in high school at some time. Maybe you've read it in college. If not, I hope you will come across it. Check out both of the poems, To a Waterfowl and Thanatopsis. Use your own lively minds, your own intelligence as you ponder the poems. Oh, one other thing. William Cullen Bryant went on to become a lawyer, yes. But later he became the noted editor of the New York Evening Post. For nearly half a century he was a journalistic leader for our nation, and fortunately for us, he also kept on writing poems. His steps were indeed guided rightly. He had something working for him, something we all need. Bill had faith.
He who from zone to zone guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the long way that I must tread alone, will lead my steps aright. That was Bill, 1815, and faith for us today. Back with you next week.